A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and dedicated advocates for climate action. A very warm welcome to each of you as we're back to our fourth day. It is an honor to stand before you as your MC for this remarkable gathering. In collaboration with the Malaysia Pavilion at COP29 in Baku, Climate Governance Malaysia proudly hosts Malaysian support for COP29, a virtual forum bringing together thought leaders, innovators, and experts dedicated to advancing impactful climate solutions. This 2-week program reflects the Malaysia Pavilion's daily themes, delving into sustainability and reinforcing Malaysia's commitment to a resilient and sustainable future. Today's theme is Closing the Loop, the last mile to sustainably serve local and global consumer demands. Malaysia is dedicated to integrating climate action into its trade and industry strategies, ensuring economic growth aligns with sustainability. Key focus areas include establishing clear supply chain management guidelines, developing a robust carbon trading framework, and promoting a circular economy. Standardizing sustainability reporting is also vital for empowering businesses and aligning them with environmental goals, fostering a resilient economy for the future. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Gary Theseira, esteemed Director of Climate Governance Malaysia, to share his insights on COP29, with Mr. Anthony Tan, Senior Director of Support Services for the All-Party Parliamentary Group Malaysia on Sustainable Development Goals, and Director of the MySDG Center for Environmental Sustainability. Over to you, Dr. Gary and Mr. Anthony.
Thank you very much, Avicenna, and a very good morning, everyone. Here we are at day 4. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to this 4th day of our parallel sessions with the Malaysia Pavilion over in Azerbaijan. We at CGM could not be happier that you have chosen to spend your time with us this morning. Today's theme, as we know, is closing the loop, the last mile, sustainability serving local and global consumer demands. And we'll get to our esteemed guest, Mr. Anthony Tan, in just a little bit. But before that, a little bit of an update from Baku itself. We have Third World Network's Radhika Chatterjee reporting on the beginning of the discussions on the Sharm el-Sheikh mitigation ambition and implementation work program, otherwise known, it's quite a mouthful. We'll just call it the Mitigation Work Program, or the MWP. The documents came out from the subsidiary bodies, the co-facilitators being Ursula Fuentes from Germany and Marcela Kekana of South Africa. And some of the deepest divisions and discussions surrounded the issue of whether the inclusion of a high-level political message was necessary as part of the mitigation work program. There was also discussion and some difference of opinion on whether the work program should be linked to the global stocktake, specifically whether the work program should serve as a vehicle to link the mitigation section of the global stocktake outcome. As usual, these are fairly normal areas of disagreement between developed and developing countries. Also, of course, a big issue on whether there should be, or whether the relationship between the mitigation work program and the nationally determined contributions should be a firm link as well. The developing countries, particularly the small island developing states and the least developed countries, are deeply concerned about this because of the concept of urgency. They are in need of a very strong outcome for this mitigation work program if they are to see changes that would reduce the impact of further climate change on some of these most vulnerable small island and least developed states. Other developing country groups tend to be more concerned about whether or not the mitigation work program will end up imposing new targets on countries. In their view, the work program should be primarily to share experiences on what would enable greater ambition. And for most developing countries, this translates to actually improving the provision of the means of implementation. As we know, the developed countries are obliged to provide finance, to provide transfer of technology, as well as enhanced capacity, all these collectively known as the means of implementation. On the groupings and how they are falling out, of course, I've already mentioned the Association of Small Island States and Least Developed Countries voicing strong support for a strong outcome. Groups like ILAC, the Central American Group, South American Group, SUR, the Arab Group, the Africa Group, like-minded developing countries, as well as China, all taking a very, very strong and united stance on the role of the mitigation work program, right? And with that, let me then move over to our esteemed guest, Mr. Anthony Tan, who is joining us from, I believe, an airport lounge. Welcome, Anthony. It's always a pleasure to see you. Anthony served for 13 years as the Executive Director of the Center for Environment, Technology and Development Malaysia, CETDEM, headed by the very capable Mr. Gurmeet Singh. And since then, he has been, as was mentioned by Avicenna, Senior Director of Support Services for the All-Party Parliamentary Group Malaysia on the Sustainable Development Goals, where he serves also as Director of the My SDG Center for Environmental Sustainability. Anthony, it's a pleasure to have you here. A very, very good morning. You've worked for years and years, sort of at the ground level, where the rubber meets the road. And here we are talking about the last mile. In other words, how do we address what is often seen as a disconnect between, all the policies of governments, all levels of governments, all the governance structures of large corporations? How do you see it getting down? So maybe if you could share with us your thoughts on how different you would think the person on the street in the 1980s would compare with the person on the street from the 2000s or the 2020s with respect to awareness and knowledge about the causes, impacts of climate change. How would you see that?
First of all, good morning, Gary. Sorry, the announcements are coming over to PM. Yeah, okay. We have an acronym for the All-Party Parliamentary Group, it's the APPGM-SDG. It's also a mouthful. But what we've been doing over the last 5 years is to actually go down to the ground and have focus group discussions with various different communities within a parliamentary constituency. And as of this year, we've covered 115 parliamentary constituencies out of the 222 in parliament. Now, what we've experienced so far is when we ask a person about climate change, very often they can't tell the difference between climate and weather. So it was very hot yesterday, it's raining today, something has changed. But for them, the whole notion of climate and weather is still quite ambiguous. But when I ask fishermen, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when you go fishing, how do you know when to go out and fish and where to go to fish? You see, we look up to the sky and we look at the way the wind blows. We look at the kinds of clouds that you have. Same question I have asked farmers. When do you find the best time to actually sow the seeds for your paddy field? Same answer. Basically, I look up to the sky. I look at the different kinds of insects that are around. So for them, climate change is real in the sense that they now no longer have that capability of looking up to the sky, getting indicators from nature.
So in other words, it hasn't changed from 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and people were using what we call an almanac, basically a big book of dates.
Well, I can't say that it hasn't changed totally. I think there has been some improvement in terms of the younger people. people who are in probably the people who are, I don't know, 30 and below, they are more aware of what climate change is because of the extreme weather events that have been happening around Malaysia. I still have to educate people that when you see a flash flood, that doesn't mean it's climate change. It could be an indication of climate change, or even worse, is an indication of overdevelopment. So these are things that people need to be educated. But the younger people, I think, are a little bit more perceptive of what climate change is compared to the people of, say, the 30 something age group in the 1980s or 1990s.
So you do see a beginning of the joining of dots. In other words, the decisions I make in my life, my consumer patterns, my habits, and the broader area of how things seem to be changing from day to day. Perhaps they've also heard about the COPs. They've also heard about the convention, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement. After 28 years of COPs, of course, we're on COP29 now. How do you think the general sentiment is among the Rakyat? Let me give you some options. Perhaps is it a kind of indifference? Is there a kind of burnout already? After 28 years, why are we still talking? The curve is still going up, as we saw in some of the presentations yesterday. Is it a kind of defeatism? Is it a kind of despair? The governments aren't helping us, nature isn't helping us. How are our kids going to survive? Or is it one actually where people want to do something, but they're frustrated because no one's listening to what they need to do what they want to do? They want to buy efficient appliances, they want to buy green, climate-friendly products, they want to buy decomposable plastics, but they're simply not on the market, or they are on the market, but they're unsubsidized, and therefore they're out of reach. The last option is there optimism? Is there a kind of constructive approach to seeing that? Well, how can we help government? How can we help the private sector to move this along faster so that we ourselves can benefit? Perhaps.
Can I choose option F, which is all of the above?
Well, no, sure, by all means, please,
Yeah.
please.
God,
But give us a sense, yeah, please.
Yeah, depending on who you speak with, because if it's the machi pachi on the ground, COP would probably mean policemen, if those who understand English. To the NGOs, activists that have been following the COPs since even Rio 1992, unfortunately, we have become very good at recycling. We don't only recycle speeches, we also recycle promises. And personally, I found that the COP ends up becoming a promise of making a decision in 2 years' time. And then when the 2 years comes up, we got another idea to make a promise in 3 years' time. And that has been going on for far too long. Even in terms of the Paris Agreement, when we're talking about 100 billion a year fund, if I'm not wrong, that fund was only just what do you call on the way to being achieved only in the past 1 year. And we have nowhere come near to the 100 billion a year. So again, when we talk about academics talk about the COP at a very, very intellectual basis. The younger people, like those from Klima, those from Malaysian Youth Delegation, they are very, very aware of what's happening. I think there's a mixture of hope and frustration among the young people, because the world leaders don't seem to take this 1.5 degrees to 2 degrees Celsius seriously. Yesterday, I think the report came out that we're already 1.54 degrees Celsius. I keep telling people that, when we have a game of poker on the Titanic and we win, there's nothing to celebrate. So these are the mixture of feelings that are coming out. On the home front, we're seeing some movement towards being more sustainable in terms of purchasing. There are companies and smaller shops that are that are sprouting out, trying to serve the sustainability crowd, but these are still small and far in between.
So more still boutique, very, very niche types of
Yes, yes.
initiatives, maybe moving into things like community and some of these types of social enterprises, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah.
My wife was telling me there was one company, a shop that was actually selling what do you call refillable, if I'm not mistaken, it's refillable shampoo, refillable
Consumables.
consumables.
Mm.
And they closed shop. They closed shop because there wasn't a demand.
Mm.
So Malaysians have not reached that stage of looking at sustainability from a day-to-day lifestyle.
Yeah, I think there have been also a number of startups trying to use vending for direct sales, and I did use them for a while, but I found out that there was some issues, sort of nitty-gritty implementation issues at the very tail end that might have interfered with some of these things. Can we change a little bit and talk about you know, if now that we've got a sense of who we are trying to reach out to, how do you think the stakeholders in charge of getting the message out can be more effective? You know, how can federal government, state government, local government, even the corporate messaging, how do you think that we can fill in the knowledge gaps that these entities, these stakeholders might have to help them to more effectively communicate and bridge this
Okay,
communication?
what I'm going to say probably sounds like a spoiled record, but SEPA, I think, is something that cannot be overstated.
Yeah.
Awareness, creating awareness, of course, is something that we tend to do, but it's often a one-off thing. So, what I would actually like to see is from the district office upwards. So, because unfortunately, well, on one hand, the district office is a legacy of the British Raj, but on the other hand, the district office still plays a major role in the rural areas in Malaysia.
Yes.
Then you start moving into the semi-urban and urban. I live in Subang Jaya. It's in the Petaling district, but it has 3 mayors. So it's a very, very strange situation. Yeah, so from district to local authority to state to federal. And I think the different ministries have to play a cohesive role. It's just like SDG cannot be played by one ministry alone, cannot be left to the Ministry of Economy. So all ministries have to look into climate change. And I believe that the review of the climate change policies have just been done. We're looking at the new Change Act that is coming out. It might be next year. I don't know whether it's going to be hurried in that sense, because I would think that a policy that is going to affect your grandchildren, my great grandchildren, 30, 40 years from now, it should be fully studied. The MPs should be given the opportunity to have a better understanding themselves of what climate change is and what are the repercussions of climate change if we do not take action now. So, education, continuous education, and action.
Yeah, thank you. And once again, to the audience, if you have any questions for Mr. Anthony Tan, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We'll be happy to take questions if there's time at all. Anthony, if you were standing, put yourself in the shoes, very diverse size and shape, shoes of the Malaysian public, do you say that the administration is moving too fast, too slowly, at the right pace? Are they sort of taking the steps commensurate with the way the preparedness for the rakyat, given the burden on the rakyat as well? How do you see that as happening? What do you hear on the street? we all see that we do know that climate change is associated with human misery, with human suffering, but we don't want it too much and all at once. What do you say about that? Yeah.
Okay. We actually have a project in collaboration with the KL Residents Association plus Sustainable Development, KRRA plus SD. It all started off with a project 2 years ago where we were looking at overdevelopment in Cheras. And they have now come to a point where they have, if I'm not mistaken, in their coalition, which is registered under ROS, they have, if I'm not mistaken, 70 residents associations working together in looking into the development issues of Kuala Lumpur. And this is where residents are actually taking things into their own hands to deal with the DPKR. Quite interestingly, the new mayor of DPKL was the former head of Habitat UN. It's a totally different ballgame now in KL. But what I want to reiterate is the need for, okay, this may be political, but the need for local council elections. Because right now, local councils are still working depending on the mandate given by the state government. The Rakyat actually have very little say on how development is being done within their locality. Of course, you have the what you call the physical plans and whatnot. KL 2040 and all. Subang Jaya. Actually, seriously, I do not know the what you call the dates for the development plans. But if we have a say in who is actually within the council, we actually, instead of appointing a council member, we actually vote for a council member. Then if the council member does not perform, we can vote them out the next 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a very important insight. I think, political or not, I mean, the fact remains that I think that the Rakyat do want to, and they're doing it themselves, as you mentioned, they've been taking it into their own. And the same thing is happening in my neighborhood with respect to food recycling and food waste recycling. So we actually are running out of time. We have about 2 minutes remaining. In the last 2 minutes, before I express my deep gratitude to you being on, would you have any closing message? What would you like to the listeners this morning to take away with them on the issue of last mile?
Okay. Actually, there's another issue of last mile transportation. Government has spent loads of money on LRT 1, 2, and 3 is coming online. MRT 1, 2, 3, the buses. Let's utilize them, because that's one solid way of reducing carbon emissions. We can talk till the cows come home, but the reality is every climate change conference, we are expending more and more CO2 by flying. So I prefer this kind of conversation over Zoom. It's great, it's efficient. Thank you.
All right. Then there you have, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Anthony Chan, who, like I said, spent a lot of time with SETDEM 13 years and is now the senior, I think, what's the acronym again?
APPGM
SDG, yes. All right. And we hope you continue to stay with us, ladies and gentlemen, for the rest of the panels that we have coming up. Thank you very much, Anthony. It's been a pleasure having you. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to the Secretariat at CGM. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry, and the organizers.
Thanks so much for the insightful discussion, Dr. Gary and Mr. Anthony. As a quick reminder, we'll commence our daily program with a 30-minute breakfast chat with Dr. Gary and his guest speaker as he unpacks his daily observations. Now, please join me in welcoming Joseph de Cruz, volunteer of Climate Governance Malaysia, to deliver the welcoming remarks for Day 4.
Good morning. On behalf of Climate Governance Malaysia, I am pleased and honored to welcome you to Day 4 of Malaysia's COP29 parallel program. The theme for today's session is Closing the Loop, the last mile to sustainably serve local and global consumer demands. The shift towards a circular economy has gained significant momentum in recent years. This involves minimizing resource extraction, reducing waste, and promoting sustainability at every step of production and consumption. For Malaysia, closing the loop is critical not only to meet local consumer demands now and in the future, but also to stay competitive in the global market, where sustainability is becoming a key factor. One area where Malaysia is making strides is in reducing plastic waste. With the government's Malaysia Plastic Sustainability Roadmap 2021 to 2030, the nation is working to reduce single-use plastics, encourage recycling, and increase the use of biodegradable alternatives. Local industries, especially manufacturing, are also embracing sustainability by adopting eco-friendly production practices and incorporating recycled materials into their products. The electronics sector, for example, is increasingly integrating recycling programs to recover precious materials from e-waste, ensuring that valuable resources are reused rather than discarded. Similarly, in our palm oil industry, the push for sustainable certification and responsible waste management practices is helping Malaysia align its production with global sustainability standards such as the RSPO. Addressing the last mile of sustainable consumption is equally crucial. This refers to the final step of delivering products to consumers in an environmentally responsible way. Many Malaysian businesses are transitioning to sustainable packaging and optimizing their logistics operations to reduce carbon footprints. E-commerce platforms, for instance, are promoting eco-friendly delivery options and reducing excess packaging to meet the growing demands for sustainable products. By closing the loop and addressing the last mile in production and consumption, Malaysia is positioning itself as a forward-looking, sustainable player in both local and global markets, serving consumer demands without compromising environmental integrity. I look forward to an interesting and substantive set of discussions, which will help frame how the last mile challenge can best be addressed in our context here in Malaysia. But a few quick reminders before we begin. This session will be recorded and made available on CGM's official YouTube channel. Attendees are welcome to follow CGM's LinkedIn page for the latest climate updates, and you can stay connected by signing up for the CGM newsletter, as well as finding relevant links and resources at the official website www.cgmalaysia.com. www.cgmalaysia.com. Now, without further ado, let me turn the session over to our first speaker.
Good morning.
Thank you very much, JD. We shall now continue with a showcase by the Malaysian Recycling Alliance, or MAREA. I will now pass the floor to Mr. Jason Anom, Advocacy and Public Affairs Manager of MAREA. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Avicenna, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jason, as introduced by Avicenna just a moment ago. So welcome, everyone, to this morning's MAREA Showcase, co-hosted with the Climate Governance Malaysia. We're very happy to be part of this showcase, especially with our participation in COP29 this year. So to give a quick introduction of what we will be doing this morning. So our MAREA Showcase will be divided into two sections. The first section will be a keynote address by our Chief Executive Officer, Roberto Benetello. This will be followed by a panel discussion, which will be looking into the topic of closing the value chain loop, balancing consumer packaging requirements with environmental stewardship. So let me introduce to you our keynote address speaker, Mr. Roberto Benetello. So Roberto Benetello is the Chief Executive Officer of MAREA, the Malaysian Recycling Alliance Berhad, Malaysia's first voluntary, not-for-profit, industry-driven extended producer responsibility, or EPR platform. MAREA aims to tackle consumer packaging waste issues, drive recycling rates, and increase the use of secondary raw materials. Roberto is a corporate sustainability expert dedicated to helping businesses accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. He offers tools, methodologies, training, and capacity building to support the integration of sustainability into corporate strategy and operations. Roberto is also the founder and a board member of BCSD Malaysia Berhad, the Business Council for Sustainable Development Malaysia, a global network partner of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or WBCSD. With over 30 years of experience, Roberto has held several senior general management positions with both Fortune 500 companies and startups in Italy, the UK, Spain, and Malaysia. Roberto holds an MBA from SDA Boccacini in Italy and an MA from Lincoln University, UK. Over to you, Roberto.
What a generous introduction, Jason. Thank you very much. So it's a great pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you very much to Climate Governance Malaysia. Thank you for the opportunity. So Jason already spoke a little bit about MAREA. MAREA was set up in 2021 as a coalition, as an industry coalition by some visionary industry leaders that decided to set up this platform for voluntary extended producer responsibility in the context, in the space of post-consumer packaging in Malaysia. We are aspiring to become the producer responsibility organization in Malaysia that takes care of post-consumer packaging, and we advocate for an industry-led non-profit producer responsibility organization for post-consumer packaging. So in the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about EPR. I'm going to illustrate to you the main drivers and the main trends that we observe right now in the space of EPR. I'm going to focus on what are the gaps in developing EPR around the world, but most importantly in Malaysia. Then I'm going to talk about the interventions from MAREA, what we're actually doing on the ground. And then to finish off, I want to share with you some of the challenges that we are experiencing right now. So let me share, without further ado, my deck. Just 1 second, please. I've lost my share button. Can you see my screen? Can you see my deck, my slide?
We can see it, Mr. Roberto.
All right. So yes, thank you very much. And let's start with the first topic, which is let's look at the drivers for extended producer responsibility. What are the external factors driving the push for EPR? So we have EPR policies, policy frameworks being implemented all over the world. In the Western countries, they've been around for over 20 years, but in some of the other countries around the world, especially in developing countries, this is happening as we speak. So the main drivers are these, first of all, regulatory compliance. Obviously, in some countries, EPR schemes have become already mandatory. So the compliance, regulatory compliance must be there. But in many countries, like Malaysia, EPR schemes are voluntary, are on a voluntary basis at this particular stage. So there are other factors that are driving companies to adopt EPR on a voluntary basis. And these include, for example, access to raw material in order to secure reliable sources of recyclable materials. It's a way to achieve competitive advantage by introducing new innovative solutions for packaging design and product design, waste reduction, and the creative differentiation to new consumers. Stakeholder expectations are stronger and stronger, and there is pressure mounting from customers, investors, employees, and NGOs. And this is a big driver, especially for large multinationals, that they've made some important pledges, for example, on how to include recycled content in their packaging, and that they need to meet the stakeholders' expectations. There is an element of long-run cost savings in terms of reducing material consumption, minimize waste generation, and lower production costs. And last but not least, there's an upside in terms of reputation and brand image because EPR enhances the company reputation and demonstrate the company's willingness to embrace in stronger corporate social responsibility action. Another important trend that is driving EPR is the growing demand for secondary plastic. The global recycled plastic market is expected to be worth USD 120 billion by 2030. The number itself may not be significant to you, but if you look at the compound annual growth rate of the recycled market, the recycled plastic market, 8.1% between now and 2030, it shows that the market is growing really rapidly and well. And this growth is driven by the environmental awareness and regulatory pressure mainly, but also there's a notable shift in consumer habit towards more sustainable products. There are other relevant factors that need to be mentioned that are driving EPR, the adoption of EPR policies all over the world. And some of these factors and some of these policy elements are currently being discussed at the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution. So one is the percentage of recycled content for packaging. The trend is for setting mandatory targets for recycled content in packaging to drive the demand for recycled material and reduce the use of virgin plastic. So the INC5 position, for example, in this particular topic is there is general consensus on the importance of incorporating recycled content into packaging materials, and we will see shortly, numbers, real percentage numbers that are going to appear in different jurisdictions. In terms of eco-design principles, it's important to design packaging to be more recyclable, reused, and compostable to minimize environmental impact. And again, eco-design is another important position discussed at INC5, and eco-design is recognized as a critical strategy for reducing plastic pollution. And another element which is going to be an important component of EPR policies all over the world is eco-modulation. Eco-modulation is basically a way of setting EPR fees in relation to different materials. And eco-modulation can incentivize producers to design environmentally friendly packaging. So eco-modulation is gaining traction everywhere as a mechanism to incentivize sustainable packaging design. So EPR is definitely an enabler of circular economy because it allows us to move from produce, consume, and dispose, which is the normal flow of a linear economy, which yields high waste generation. And as I said, it allows us to move to a circular economy from produce to consume to recover and reprocess. And at each stage of this circular model, EPR plays a very important role. For example, at the stage of production, EPR ensures that sustainable products are designed and produced. At the consumer side, EPR supports separation at source. In fact, EPR programs include SEPA activities, communication, education, and public awareness activities. When it comes to recover, EPR works in different ways to make sure that materials are collected for recycling. So EPR uses different models, the current infrastructure, and also new collection models to make sure that recycling rates increase. But EPR is very, very important because it creates enough feedstock, a good, reliable flow of feedstock for whoever wants to invest in recycling technologies, and also in technologies that allow the recycling of difficult to recycle material. And all this with the end objective of creating a good, healthy market of secondary raw materials. In terms of this last point, enabling secondary markets, this is a very important point, a very important function of EPR, because ultimately what we want is to have rPET, recyclable PET, recycled HDPE, recyclable plastics that can be actually put back into the production for companies to use it for packaging again. So in terms of what is necessary to enable the secondary markets, let me share with you a few important points. Separation at source, effective source separation in residential and commercial industrial settings can highly improve recycling rates. The collection systems, we need a robust infrastructure in terms of designated bins and regular collection schedules and efficient material gathering. We need standards and certification. This is another very important point. Implementing standards and certification, including, for example, halal certification on recycled plastic, ensures the quality and safety of recycled products. There needs to be infrastructure investment in a recycling facility, for example, in advanced sorting technology, logistics, to handle diverse type of materials in an efficient way. Technology plays a very important role, especially when it comes to new recycling technology like chemical recycling, for example. Collaboration is another important factor, is very important, partnership and collaboration initiatives between different actors and entities. Economic viability, ensuring that recycling is economically viable. And here, plugging EPR into the system, into the waste management system is extremely important because additional funding can really help with this economic viability. And last but definitely not least, the public awareness is another very important point. So in order to illustrate with a very basic slide graphics how EPR works, from left to right, we see that on the left-hand side, we collect recyclables at different collection points, could be households, could be commercial entities, but mostly we deal with households. And then collectors, there are different types of collectors, they collect these recyclables. The recyclables get then sorted, and then they are sent to treatment facility for recycling, the so-called recyclers. Recyclers deal with different type of materials. Can be a recycler for PET, there can be a recycler for HDPE, for aluminium, for used beverage cartons, and so on and so forth. And then the secondary raw materials are produced and then sold to manufacturers. Whatever cannot be recycled is then sent to landfilling and or incineration. But you can see that the part that goes to landfilling and incineration is drastically reduced because a lot of recycling takes place. So what is the role of EPR? What is the role of a producer responsibility organization? The role is to coordinate all these activities, and with the funding that is collected from the industry, make sure that the funding is allocated to all the different phases, all the different steps in this mechanism, so that the funding is used to make sure that efficiency is achieved and higher recycling rates are also achieved. When it comes to the gaps in developing EPR in Malaysia, but also this is true across in many different jurisdictions around the world, some of the important hurdles that we are working on are the following. There is a lack of legal framework and enforcement and monitoring. And in fact, MAREA is working very hard together with the policymakers here in Malaysia to make sure that we gather enough experience to design a good, solid policy framework for EPR in Malaysia. There are currently no recycling targets, and therefore there's no ownership of recycling targets. There's no clarity in stakeholders' roles and responsibility. There's a limited capacity of the formal collection system. What does it mean? It means that in Malaysia, the formal collection system, for example, the concessionaires for municipal solid waste They collect the waste, but they are now focusing currently on collection for recycling. So what EPR needs to do, it needs to work with the current infrastructure, with the current actors, and make sure that the amount of recycling, the recyclables are actually extracted from the waste and dealt with in a different way. Currently, there is a big reliance, I would say, on the informal sector, but there is lack of visibility of the same. So we know that the informal sector contributes a lot, but we are not, we don't understand very well the dynamics of the informal sector. There's a limited separation at source. Currently, voluntary EPR is what we have in Malaysia. And in order to keep the momentum, it's very important to move from voluntary to mandatory EPR. But this is a big challenge because, as I said before, we need to have a legal legislative framework, and we need to include a much larger number of companies. And last but not least, the lack of direction from the public sector and the industry. Let's take a look at some of the interventions from MAREA, what actually MAREA has been doing. And I must say that this year has been a very important year for us because we have been gathering experience with a number of projects. So let's start in 2021. MAREA was established. In 2023, MAREA developed operation models for voluntary EPR. In 2024, we started conducting different projects in different parts of Malaysia, Peninsula, but also in Borneo, in Sarawak specifically. And in 2025, we want to move on and increase the number of projects that we are doing, and we will work together with KPKT and SW Corp and embark on a proper simulation phase, which is going to be monitored by the government, and hopefully that will allow us to inform a more formal legislative framework, which will lead eventually to mandatory EPR in the country. Currently, these are the members of MAREA. There are 13 main contributors. You can see them on the left-hand side, and also we have 10 associate contributors. And you can see, I'm sure you have recognized some of the brand names, the logos. These are really large companies, multinational, regional, and local companies that already put on the market a substantial amount of packaging materials. But we need more companies. We need to widen, expand the coalition in the coming years. As I said, we have a number of projects ongoing, and we are currently testing different methodologies. We collect recyclables directly from households, but we also work with recyclers and the informal sector in order to understand how things work. Some of the challenges that we are facing include the following. I've already hinted to the fact that MAREA needs to grow because this is a business of scale. So as we are moving into this simulation phase in 2025, we are hoping to scale up the number of members and move to the current 13 main contributors to probably 50 or 60. And that will allow us to really experiment at a adequate scale and understand how we can move MAREA to a mandatory status. We still need to do some work to understand what are the different methodologies that EPR or a PRO, a producer responsibility organization, must use in the country, in Malaysia, to collect a good number of recyclables effectively. So there's no one size fits all. There are different approaches, different methodologies, working, for example, collecting recyclables from the household, but also using the informal sector and the recyclers. So we are still trying to understand what is the right balance. It's very, very important that we also find a way to work with the current infrastructure and most importantly, with the concessionaires for solid waste management in the country. And another important point is to focus on ESG compliance among the supply chain participants. So this is another point that we need to be very mindful of. There's no current solution in Malaysia for difficult to recycle materials. And I'm referring especially to soft plastics and multi-layer plastics. Also, we have to learn much more on how to deal with the informal sector. And to this point, this very crowded slide shows some of the numbers. The informal sector, basically, the take-home points are the informal sector is a very sizable sector. So we're not talking about a few people. We're talking about quite a number of operators in the informal sector, especially in the urban settings. We are also, if you look at the environmental contribution at the top, the 59% signifies the percentage of all plastic recycled globally and collected by the informal sector. And I don't know exactly what is the number in Malaysia, but I can assure you the number is very, very significant. So the informal sector contributes a lot in collection for recycling, especially for high-value plastics or high-value materials. And the last part is the economic contribution. How important is recycling for the livelihood of these people? The answer is it is very important. So whatever we decide to do with EPR and however we want to design an EPR policy in Malaysia, it has to take into account the informal sector, and we need to find a way to integrate the informal sector so that the informal operators can improve the livelihood moving forward. In conclusion, another few challenges that we're facing. We need to make sure that EPR in Malaysia has the function to enable ecosystem development. Okay, so the project that we are currently undertaking shows that there is it's quite difficult to identify reliable, organized private partners for collection and sorting, for example. And we need to make sure that EPR funding, EPR money will eventually improve or will enable this sector to develop. It's important that MAREA establishes good, strong relationship with some key stakeholders. MAREA should strive to demonstrate resilience and leadership, and MAREA's initiative should be impactful, ensuring that funding is utilized effectively and efficiently. This is another key point. The industry-led EPR also signifies that the funding from the industry need to be channeled to activities that produce an efficient way of recovering recyclables. SEPA, communication, education, and public awareness activities, we have seen with our projects that delivering SEPA activities is extremely important in order to stimulate participation and in order to increase recycling rates. The key is to develop SEPA activities together with collection projects. So the two things must go together and they need to be delivered at community level. This kind of skill is a skill that we need to develop within MAREA. We need to become better at delivering SEPA because SEPA is a key element in the whole equation. And finally, it's important to find a way to collaborate and work together with local authorities, especially in low-income areas, and together with local authorities, try to establish a minimum level of enforcement when it comes to driving separation at source. And that's all from my side. I will stay available perhaps later for the Q&A session. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Cool. Thank you, Roberto, for that very informative keynote address. Likewise, as Roberto mentioned earlier on, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop it into the Q&A box in your Zoom panel, or you can wait for the Q&A session towards the end of our showcase. So moving on, after the very informative keynote address by our CEO, Roberto Benetello, I'd like to basically start off with our panel session with the theme Closing the Value Chain Loop, Balancing Consumer Packaging Requirements with Environmental Stewardship. So as we have already quite well aware of over the past few days of COP29 and over the past few years, at least in Malaysia, sustainability and being circular has always been on the forefront of what the Malaysian government and policymakers are trying to strive to as well, especially when we try to reach our net zero targets. So in the pursuit of actually reaching these targets, Malaysia has already set numerous goals towards sustainability and the circular economy, especially when it comes to closing the loop. This last mile to sustainability has to serve local and global consumer demands while meeting our sustainability targets and objectives. And this is a hot topic and one which more and more corporates and policymakers are taking up. So as our colleague and from CGM, Joseph earlier on said, there are numerous ideas, policies, and roadmaps floating around. And Malaysia has quite a few, especially among others, the Malaysia Plastic Sustainability Roadmap and other policies, whether it's under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability, Ministry of Local Government and Housing, or even the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. They all have different policies, but all having the overarching goal of basically trying to create and establish a circular economy. Among these targets are a 40% recycling rate by 2025, 100% recyclability of packaging, as well as 15% recycled content for plastic products and packaging by 2030. So as we shift towards this transition in closing the loop, this involves balancing the needs of packaging requirements with more sustainable packaging practices in order to achieve a more efficient use and recirculation of resources in our vision towards environmental stewardship. This transition must go beyond targets and policies set by the government. It requires an industry-led bottom-up approach, even a grassroots approach, and this would include voluntary obligations as well as extended producer responsibilities to tackle the challenges of sustainable packaging and maximizing resource efficiency in a circular economy. We have to shift away from corporate social responsibility more towards actual corporate responsibility. We have to ingrain it within our systems and not just have it as something which is nice to have, but something that we must have. So with this context setting in place, let me introduce our esteemed panelists who represent some of the major brands and producers who have started this journey in closing the value chain loop. So first of all, let me introduce Ms. Ramjeet Kaur Virik, Chairperson of the Malaysian Recycling Alliance and the Managing Director of Dutch Lady Milk Industries Malaysia Berhad. Ramjeet was recently elected our Chairperson of MAREA this year and is also the Managing Director of Dutch Lady Milk Industries since 2021. She's been with FrieslandCampina for over 12 years, with roles in Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. She has more than 20 years of experience in various roles, namely in marketing, sales, and shopper functions. Her career started in other leading fast-moving consumer goods companies, including British American Tobacco, Malaysia, and Heineken Malaysia Berhad, formerly known as Guinness Anchor Berhad. Next up, we have Ms. Maria Angela N. Esquivel, or Angela. She is the Asia Corporate Affairs Director at FrieslandCampina, AMEA Private Limited. Angela, a lawyer by profession, has been actively doing private litigation for more than 10 years prior to joining FrieslandCampina in 2017. She is an experienced corporate affairs practitioner specializing in government and public relations, communications, sustainability, legal, and good governance. She's also currently the co-chair for the Sustainability Committee of the European Chamber in Singapore. Next up, we have Mr. Riichiro Osawa, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at Ajinomoto Malaysia Berhad. Mr. Osawa joined Ajinomoto in April 1995 and has held various positions in Japan and overseas within the Ajinomoto group of companies. He was appointed to the board of Ajinomoto Malaysia Berhad on 1st July 2023. And finally, last but not least, we have Mr. John Kaur, Research and Development Manager at Unilever Malaysia. John has held managerial positions across manufacturing and research and development in the home, beauty, and personal care and food industries, and has spent the past 15 years with Unilever, with most of his time in home, beauty, and personal care. He's currently the personal care R&D lead for Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. Thank you all for being part of this panel this morning. So let me start with a question to Ramjeet on behalf of MAREA. So the CEO of MAREA, Roberto, earlier on explained to us what the EPR system is, why it's needed, and the steps that we need to actually get there. It's a long journey, as we've experienced, but it's a journey that we have to go through, especially when we go down to mandatory EPR coming soon. So from an industry point of view, why are producers and brand owners part of MAREA, especially at this stage when it is not mandatory in Malaysia?
Thanks, Jason, and good morning to everyone. I think, firstly, before we go into the business, I think I just wanted to say that we, as humans, are all aware and felt the impact of climate change. I mean, we've seen all the problems on the increasing temperatures, the heat, and even in Malaysia, we have floods, sinkholes, landslides. So a lot of things are happening, causing disruptions in our personal lives, but also to our supply chain and businesses. It is alarming to see actually how fast the climate is deteriorating. And I mean, we all have children to leave this planet too. So I think this, for me, firstly, appeals to us as humans above our role as producers and brand owners. Then from a business perspective, I mean, as shared by Roberto earlier, we know EPR is coming, whether you look at it internationally or even within Southeast Asia. I think the approach we have from MAREA and the founding members and the members today is to be at the table with the government. The beauty is we can learn from others and together, collectively, we are able to run projects in order to test what is the right model that can work in Malaysia, while at the same time driving awareness of the topic to businesses and consumers. As you said, we are all large consumer brands in this country and in this part of the world. And ultimately, I think this will help to shape the EPR policy in the right way to ensure that we get the right views and able to work for Malaysia. This public-private partnership and engagement is important. And I want to use this opportunity to give my appreciation actually to the founding members of MAREA, the management of MAREA, and the active participation of its members, and also to appreciate our government stakeholders who have actually recognized MAREA and having us at the table to have the discussions on how do we shape the right EPR policy.
Okay, thank you, Ramjeet, for emphasizing that yeah, we know it's coming, so we should basically be part of it. Look beyond just being corporate, but look at it from a more personal, more holistic point of view. That we are basically stewards of this planet. We don't own it; we're just taking care of it for the next generation and generations to come. Okay, great. So so having said that, as you mentioned, MAREA does constitute some of the largest some of the large global, regional, and local FMCG companies in Malaysia. We have a big combination of your large corporations which are already active in EPR in other jurisdictions. We also have some local ones who have just a local market, such as I think one of our founding members, Spritzer. They don't have a presence elsewhere, but they have a presence in Malaysia. A very good example of a local company who is spearheading this initiative. So while global companies have obligations and global commitments, why should regional and local FMCGs be part of this coalition when they don't have to make the commitment, when they don't have such global shareholders to basically tell them, please go invest in this, please go focus on EPR? Why should they be part of this when there are no set requirements?
Yeah. I mean, partly it was linked to the previous answer, right? I think it is the right thing to do, and it is coming. So I think that's the starting point. But you're absolutely right. As part of larger companies, like Dutch Lady is part of FrieslandCampina, we do have commitments, let's say, to align with our parent companies. And some of us are also public listed, and we have to follow, let's say, the public listed requirements, and we have to do it. But I think what is important to keep at the back of our minds is eventually we will all have to participate when it becomes mandatory. Yeah, and what I would like to appeal to everyone is that we have to start somewhere, and we have to start with the right intent of wanting to do it, and then start the journey of understanding, learning, even before we are able to do so. Just to share, I mean, even for me personally, I mean, it took me, I think, a year to even get started on the sustainability mindset. Then it took me another year to develop my knowledge, to develop it within Dutch Lady Milk Industries Berhad. Then we got the roadmaps. So it does take time. And only now, in I would say my year 3, I actually feel a little bit more confident to talk about sustainability publicly, because I'm in no way an expert, but I think it's important to start that journey, and to just test and learn together. So my view is it's coming. We can, and I think we can learn from each other. And I think what's the beauty of having the coalition of like-minded companies is there's a huge openness to share, like what we have felt in MAREA, and we just need to get started. That's the point. Yeah.
That's a very good point, Ramjeet. We have to get started. We have to start somewhere. So even if we learn from our mistakes throughout the process, and I think that's a good learning from us as well as we move forward. So yeah, so perfect segue, as I mentioned, that Dutch Lady is part of FrieslandCampina, and you do have obligations on the global side. So question to Angela. So FrieslandCampina, again, like as Ramjeet mentioned, like quite a lot of global FMCG companies. They're actively part of schemes very similar to MAREA, EPR, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in Asia or whichever jurisdiction you're part of as well. And you're also a major proponent of EPR in all the jurisdictions that you are active in as well. So what drives these global FMCGs to be active participants in environmental stewardship and packaging circularity? What drives you?
Thanks, Jason. But first of all, allow me to greet everyone. Good morning and happy Friday. What a very appropriate topic for us to discuss closer to the weekend and on a sunny day, at least in Singapore. It's sunny, but I don't know in other parts of Asia. I know that there's a calamity in the Philippines and there are some sinkholes in Malaysia. So I'm not so sure about being sunny in other parts of the world. But I have two answers to your question. I'd like it to keep it short and sweet because it was actually comprehensively explained already by our esteemed guest speaker. Number one is, as Ramjeet said earlier, it is the right thing to do. It's like you have a home and you know that there is an imminent typhoon. What are you going to do? Right? We are just stewards of this earth. I listened to your pitch earlier, RJ, and that is so true. So that is why that is part of our DNA. For FrieslandCampina as corporate citizen, we own it. We know that our responsibility is not only to deliver and produce nutritious, accessible, and affordable dairy products, but it should always be in balance with the planet. And as human beings, we are stewards of this earth. We are also responsible to take care of the one planet that we live in. At least for now, we know that there's only one livable planet. Yeah. Second, it is the smart thing to do. So this was also mentioned earlier. Why is it the smart thing to do? For corporate citizens, we know that across Asia, or not only in Asia, but globally, there's already EPRs or different environmental regulations being planned or already being implemented, whether voluntarily or mandatorily. In fact, as we speak, there is an ongoing climate conference, and then in a few weeks from now, there will be another conference about coming up with global plastics treaty. Why? Because there is a need to do so, and governments are stepping in. So good corporate citizens should be way steps ahead of all this legislation. That is a responsible thing to do. Number two, admittedly, this is also for brand reputation. And that is needed in order to keep our business sustainable, right? More and more consumers are now more aware. Maybe on top of the consideration still is the price, but secondary or even third or fourth factor would always be environmental sustainability. And last, of course, is with all these drives or motivation to become responsible corporate citizens toward environmental friendly packaging, is the end goal to make our value chain more sustainable by making our supply chain efficient and avoidance of resource wastage. And of course, needless to state, it will make our business more sustainable in the long run. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Angela, for that. Yes, it does. We do have to be good corporate citizens and be sustainable as well. And of course, brand reputation is part of it, and consumers do require it. So we have to make sure that we are at the forefront and we are not caught unaware of what happens. So as you rightly mentioned, that we have to be good corporate citizens and we have to be at the forefront and being aware of what's going on surrounding us. We can't just be in our little bubbles. Focusing on shareholder value. Shareholder value comes in many different shapes and forms, but for some people, these initiatives are seen less as ingraining the system, changing how we think, changing how we operate, but more as either at best corporate social responsibility, just a thing to tick off a box, or even at worst, greenwashing. So how do these changes within a company's global operations, especially in embedding sustainability, address these statements in our drive to closing the loop? How can we make sure that we are not seen as just greenwashing, that we are genuine in our efforts to create a more sustainable environment?
Yeah, okay. Again, another good question, Jason. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the elephant in the room. We know that all of us are taking that small steps, making our own personal initiatives towards sustainability. But of course, it also helps to have people who always challenge us. For example, asking us, isn't it a greenwashing claim? Or there's also another term, milk washing as well. But to us, that is another driver to make our targets realistic and pragmatic, transparent, and we always make sure that it is measurable. So for a publicly listed company like FrieslandCampina, like Dutch Lady, we make sure that we regularly report to our stakeholders what our targets are, what our KPIs are, what is our roadmap. So the what and the how do we achieve those targets? It's not like it's only on paper. There has to be a step-by-step granular roadmap. How are we going to achieve it and when? And when that period comes, the milestones, you also report it to your stakeholders and make sure that there is proper third-party certification. Because in the absence of that certification, those are all just self-serving reports, right? So transparency is the key. Regular communication with your stakeholders is the key, and there should always be enough proof points to have your reports verified by third party. So that's the way to integrate your sustainability targets to your business and assure the stakeholders that you are being sincere and authentic in your sustainability targets.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Angela. Yes, that's actually a very good point. It's like we have to make sure that whatever we do is measurable, quantifiable, and most importantly, it's able to be held against scrutiny. So if anybody asks us do we have the proof behind us saying, this is, we're not giving out these numbers for the sake of numbers, but there is a good, reliable and audited backing behind it. Yes, it's a very good point to at least address those concerns, of course, concerns in greenwashing. And also, it also makes sure that we are held accountable to whatever we make and to whatever we say as well. If we say that we're doing this, we're doing this. Somebody can just come back and audit, and if we can't do it, we have a good response why. But at the same time, we should be held accountable to whatever statements and commitments we make there as well. So, which then puts me to the next question to Riichiro-san from Ajinomoto. So, Ajinomoto has a zero plastic waste by 2030 objective. And this objective includes, among others, minimizing plastic usage in product packaging, as well as accelerating the transition towards a circular economy. So as Ramjeet said, we need to basically be ahead of the curve. As Angela said, we have to be able to be held accountable to those figures. But how did these objectives come about? And what drives Ajinomoto and companies similar to Ajinomoto to come up with these objectives, these very ambitious targets, so to speak?
Okay, good morning, Jason, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity. Thanks for the question. Yeah, simply as a company operating the business globally, we think it's really our responsibility. We have our goal as Ajinomoto Group is to contribute to the well-being of all human beings, our society, and also our planet with amino science. To this end, we believe it's necessary to achieve two outcomes by 2030. One is to help extend healthy life expectancy of people. We have target numbers. And also number two is to reduce our environmental impact by 50% against 2018 result, which is of course ambitious, but this is connected by food systems. The business we run is supported by sound food systems, or in other words, stable access to the food resources and the bird and natural environment supporting these resources. At the same time, our business operations also have a major impact on the environment. So today, we all know that the planet environment is reaching a tipping point, and we have to really start. Our ability to take action to regenerate the environment is an urgent issue, as everybody's now talking, for the continuity of the of course, continuity of all the activities, but also our group's business operations. So following this Ajinomoto Group policy, we, Ajinomoto Malaysia, per head, have been also focusing to reduce the environmental impacts on three key areas. One is greenhouse gases emission reduction, and another one is food loss reduction, and the plastic waste reduction. So zero plastic waste by 2030. This is internally, we also understand this is really challenging target. But addressing this is very crucial to our and global sustainability goals, especially contributing to social and environmental issues. So in accelerating the transition toward the circular economy aligned to Ajinomoto Group goals, and also Malaysia's circular economy blueprint, Ajinomoto Malaysia, we had started to implement first 30% use of recycled resin, post-industry recycle, in the production of our secondary packaging materials such as polybags and stretch films. We are also in the middle of studying the usage of recycled resin, post-consumer recycle, in the production of primary packaging materials. But we have to admit that there are hurdles for us and for food industry, especially related to ensuring, for example, halal compliance of such recycled resin and availability of such material at the fair price. So those would be obviously the challenges, but we are determined to really achieve this goal.
Cool. Thank you, Riichiro-san. So yeah, so objectives, as I mentioned, in just closing the loop, it includes, among other things, using improving the recyclability of the plastic and packaging materials as they transition towards 100% recyclable packaging materials, as well as using more recycled content within your materials by 2030 as well. So you mentioned a few of those concerns, challenges, such as the price of the recycled resin, recycled content resin, as well as halal certifications. But outside of those challenges, how have you embedded these practices within your operations? And what are the challenges that are facing or foresee that you will face in the future, and potential advice to other companies who may want to transition in this direction to be more sustainable in their packaging and their production to close the loop?
Thank you. So to achieve this objective, we have internally divided our activities into 2 projects. The first one is called Project Zero, where we had started to reduce the plastic usage in our packaging materials by switching to alternative materials, and also thickness and dimension reduction. That's what we are now doing. And for those packaging materials that we need to remain to use plastic component, we had started to convert to monomaterial or more easy recyclable packaging material. So that's one project we are running. And second project is called Project Zero Alpha, where we focus on post-consumer collection and recycling in collaboration with MAREA. Besides that, this team is also responsible to accelerate the activities towards circular economy for packaging materials, as mentioned earlier. We foresee many challenges in implementing these planned activities, especially on establishing a sound and cost-effective post-consumer collection, treatment of collected materials, and put back to reuse as raw materials for our new packaging production. But we think with the collaboration between the members of MAREA and with continuous communication with the relevant authorities and agency, we strongly believe it is still achievable in near future.
Cool. Thank you, Riichiro-san. Yes, it's something that we want to strive as well. And, we should be optimistic despite any headwinds and challenges that we face, whether it's in the collection and recovery of our materials or just transitioning towards the new and more sustainable packaging and recycled content as well. So again, which brings me to the more technical side of the packaging and sustainability question to Mr. John Goh of Unilever. So Unilever has a very wide portfolio of consumer goods, ranging from your standard F&B products like ice cream and biscuits, all the way down to cleaning products that you can see in our kitchens. So this wide array of products will also result in the need to balance the need of packaging requirements of the product against the sustainability targets as well, such as monomaterial packaging or recycled content requirements as well, as we have to make sure that the packaging is fit for purpose, and whatever we put inside the packaging will ensure the quality of the product that consumers expect when they get certain brands. So in your experience, your extensive experience, how can companies tackle this challenge of balancing packaging usability with packaging circularity?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I think this is a very good question. As you mentioned, tackling the challenge, right, is indeed very challenging, but not without solutions for selected materials. On balancing packaging use with circularity, I think this was chicken and egg to start with, right? As the question would be if we should start using post-consumer recycled materials or PCR in our packaging first, or wait until there is a smooth supply for local security in our country. Yeah? As Ramjeet mentioned as well just now, we have to start somewhere, right? So obviously the answer for that would be a big yes, right? For us to start using, even when supply of local post-consumer recycled materials is being enhanced in parallel. In some cases, right, as this is where we have more direct control as to usage of recycled materials in our packaging. Yeah, maybe one Unilever example I can share is our Sunlight dishwash liquid bottle, where we started years back with challenges of local PCR availability. And then we've since had 100% local PCR for local circularity. Yeah. So and this is also where we together with our esteemed fellow member companies in MAREA, right, have been doing, whereby we started by creating the demand by using PCR materials in our packaging, right? Whilst in parallel, we work together as an industry within MAREA to increase circularity, to enhance the supply side, right, of the balance, which is challenging, as I think you've seen Roberto's sharing just now, but it's something which MAREA is together, we are moving ahead towards that, to have more locally circular post-consumer recycled materials. Yeah, and I think we believe together in MAREA, we could help to continuously enhance the circularity in our country here in Malaysia.
Yeah, that's a very good point, John, that we have to basically build both the demand and supply, or supply and demand, a continuous virtual loop there as well, so that, you know, we,
Yeah.
I think quite a lot of our member companies, our main contributors, have started this journey for quite a while back as well. It's just that maybe we as consumers may not have noticed it, but I think the more that we are made aware of it, the more you notice. Just look at the back of your bottles are made from recycled content, or this bottle is 100% recyclable. It's those small messages that, while we as consumers may not necessarily notice, but they are steps in the right direction that we may not notice, but we are slowly being pushed in that way as well. So that is, you know, it's a nice, quiet, but very, very large footstep in that direction. So as we've seen with our other panels here as well, more and more companies are getting involved in closing the loop. How can we ensure that we create a truly virtuous cycle from producers to consumers, and ensure that this shift is sustainable and viable? As I think our earlier session earlier on at 8:30, they mentioned that consumers in Malaysia, they may not necessarily want the shift to be more sustainable currently. You have small little ventures, small little social enterprises that focus on refillable packaging, or bringing or being more sustainable, but the demand isn't on the Malaysian side. So how could we make sure that we can continue this virtuous cycle, that we can build and keep building that momentum towards more sustainable production and more sustainable consumption practices?
Yeah, I think this is an important question as well, as ensuring a sustainable shift is paramount, right, towards a continuous circular economy. I think in order to ensure sustainability of our local security, whilst I mentioned we as companies have started doing by using PCR materials, mono materials, or even a reduction of plastics usage, right, in our packaging, and in cases of some cases use of non-plastics where possible, which from producers. I think it's also equally important that we have the EPR, secondary market elements, in place. I think Roberto highlighted that just now. And also importantly, our consumers further down the chain to recycle, this is where MAREA also chips in, right, as part of multi-stakeholders wider effort to create the end-to-end sustainable loop. For example, there were also SEPA activities that have been activated, right, in some previous pilots within MAREA to inculcate the knowledge and habits amongst our consumers together. Hence, I think in a nutshell, this is where we as companies can do, looking at development from both ends of the balance, to create and also support the supply and demand side of the equation, which is very challenging. We've seen Roberto's, outline those challenges that we face. But I think this is where we, together as MAREA, as an industry, I think we can join hands to actually move towards that direction. I think we'll in turn create the virtuous cycle, like you mentioned, Jason, for a vibrant circular economy, and that is cost effective, and I think also sustainable in the long run. Yeah.
I just
Ramjeet.
realized I was responding when I was on mute. Okay, right. So I've got a bit excited as well. So yeah, so thank you, John, for providing those insights on how we can be more sustainable and creating a virtuous cycle. I do see some interesting questions on the Q&A box. So to all the attendees, please do keep those questions coming in. We will address those questions towards the end of this session. So I have a question for all of us, all four of us here. So what is needed to establish and ingrain best practices for environmental stewardship and closing the loop, especially for post-consumer packaging? So I'll start this question with Ramjeet, and then we'll move on from Ramjeet to Angela, Riichiro, and then John. Okay, Ramjeet, go first, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think it's also important for us to know what we need to do. And I think for me, the first thing is always have the right intent. That's the first and foremost, and it has to be leader-led. It has to come from the leaders of the organization. And I also saw one of the question. It also needs to come from the larger companies, because if we don't start, and if it's not led by the big or the responsible companies, we cannot start. Number two is actually build your own and your organization's capability on the topic. I think there is enough knowledge out there, that there are enough resources. And here again, appealing, being part of MAREA from the start. Actually, the wonderful thing about having MAREA as an organization is they have been very happy to onboard. So even we have gotten onboarded from the team from MAREA. And MAREA also conducts regular tailored capability building for its members. So I think being part of this coalition really helps, because you can also learn from each other and build that capability that we need. Then finally is we just need to move into action. And when I say move into action, we are all learning. We are all on this journey. And I think moving into action with that test and learn mindset is important, because we will fail some, we will learn some. But I think going back to what Angela was also saying, and then also measuring the impact. Yeah, because then it's about action, test and learn mindset, but let's measure so that we can measure properly, and we can also know where we are headed, and we can move ahead. So I think those are the three things: right intent, build your capability, and move into action and impact. Oh, you're mute again.
Yeah, I should. Okay, there we are. Right. Thank you, Ramjeet. Yeah, those are very, very good points. We should have the right intent, and then just basically start from there. So, Angela, your opinions, your thoughts and comments on that question. What is needed to establish and ingrain best practices?
Yep. So foremost, I think we all need to believe in it. I mean, we don't need to do it just for our KPIs. Of course, that's part of it. But someone who is a proponent of sustainability within the organization should have really a sincere desire and belief in it and embrace it. That's number one. Number two, and I always say this in every opportunity, and I sound like a broken record already. This entails a holistic approach. It may sound like a cliche already, but that's really the key. From the who, meaning the stakeholders, the government. It's not only the government, and we know that the government has very limited resources and other priorities to take care of. The corporate citizens like us, but the public as a whole. So how do we do it? By making them more aware through discussions like this. And the what type of packaging, etc., etc., and the how. We keep on talking about closing the loop. But what do we actually mean by it? Do we mean start of the production of plastics through the harmful chemicals? Because now we are only focusing on the end of life or on midstream. So these are the things. Sustainability is not easy and will never be easy. And no one can, I think, claim to be a sustainability expert that can really crack this I would say, crisis in our midst. But yeah, to make it simple, we need to have the heart, we need to have the political will, and political to do it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Angela. I think you hit the nail on the head there. We need to have the political will to do it. It's like we can build our intentions from the industry level to push for it, but we still need the political will to basically make sure that it is enforced and driven in that right direction as well. It's a very, very good point. Okay, thank you, Angela. Riichiro-san, your comments and thoughts on what is needed to establish and ingrain best practices for environmental stewardship?
Something we do in our companies is it's a very basic thing, but trying to make it a habit within the company so that people really learn and have the way of thinking and also the practice. For example, what we do in our cafeteria is that people bring their own plastic plates and so on, and then try to use it so that we don't really, have additional plastic plates and things to be wasted, and that's what we are now doing, and also reduce the amount of the plastic used with the company, and really develop the habit of recycling. That's what we try to do on a daily basis, and so that people learn and make take as really the habit.
Okay, thank you, Riichiro-san. That's a very good point as well. We basically practice what we preach. We make sure that we do what we do as we say, basically, and we basically ingrain it within that. Start small internally, and then eventually it'll spread out throughout not just our daily lives, but also our professional lives and the community as a whole. Okay, and John, your thoughts and comments on what is needed to establish and ingrain best practices for environmental stewardship?
Yeah, I echo all the speakers before me just now that I think everything starts with us, right? Me, right? Basically, I also share and one example is like in the place where I stay, the jurisdiction, there is this once a week, they will come and collect the recycled materials. So we'll bring it out. So obviously the challenge is not all jurisdictions, across the country is having that. But that is where we actually our vision, right? And at the same time, I think it's also it's always exciting and purposeful, right? When we say we develop a product, we have recycled content inside. Basically, it basically comes back to is actually doing good for the environment, which I think that is every one of us, in the companies would have this thinking. And I think the other thing would be partnerships. Partnerships of PRO, producer responsibility organization, right? Like we have in MAREA. This on a wider scale, working with relevant authorities and the people, our consumers, right? Whilst we as MAREA is doing our best, right, with multi-companies partnership, I think as Roberto and you, Jason, also is working hard to include the public-private partnerships as well as continuous awareness of our general public. Like I said just now, you come back to it start with me, right? Everybody in the public. I think that would be key.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Those are very, very good points, and I think if we can sum it up quite nicely among all of us here, it's like it all starts with the right intention that we want to go there, but at the end, right intention is there, but at what point do we start? So like, do we start at the post-consumer end? Do we start at the end of life, or should we start at the very beginning or within our operations? But it does come to the gist that at the end of the day, all of us have to play a part, whether it's us as consumers, making sure that we separate at source, we buy sustainably, we make sure that we separate all our waste from the general waste to the recycling so that we can collect the materials for recycled content, which is then recirculated either in the form of recycled content packaging, or making sure that our packaging itself will be good and it's easy to recycle there as well. So okay, so I'll take a few questions from the floor now as well. I think if we can please bring back Roberto to be part of this Q&A session as well, so we can have this more interactive. Okay, so we'll look at these questions here first. We'll start off with this very interesting question. We'll put this as a live question. So this question came from an anonymous attendee. So most of the discussion has been regarding manufacturing by large companies. True. What are the steps smaller companies should take to shift towards a circular economy when they might not have the funds or infrastructure to do so? That's a very good question. We are very much focused on large FMCGs, but other companies may also want to be part of this drive, this direction for sustainability and extended producer responsibility. So what can they do?
I can take this. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for the question. And I think it's really observant. And if you look at the companies, and maybe the way I'll answer this is funds and infrastructure. Yeah. And I think this goes back to why the coalition of MAREA was founded. Because I think the large companies, it's true, we had all this, I call it pressure from our parent companies to start. But we very fast realized that as an individual company, we cannot solve this problem. And that was how MAREA was formed a couple of years ago in 2021. And I mean, simple maths, right? If you want to run something effectively, you need money. And let's say it takes $1 million to do it. You have 10 companies, it's 100,000 a company. If you have 100 companies, it's only 10,000 per company. So I think that's where the fund comes from. And this is now maybe seen as a cost. But let's not forget that we keep talking about EPR. EPR is coming. When mandatory EPR comes, it's you have to pay. It's like a tax. We just had the sugar tax, and a lot of regulations will come in, like minimum wage. All those are costs to a business as well. So I think the faster we can get our act together, the faster that we can put together, and the more that we have, we can solve, I call it the funding issue and getting started. Then I want to talk about the infrastructure. So I think that the good thing, again, about being part of a coalition is we can tap on each other from a knowledge perspective. I think I must say that the conversations that we have in the MAREA meetings really elevates because you get expertise. Not just from Malaysia, but we have some members that bring in our expertise from all the regional markets to help with the topic. So I think being part of this is important to build that infrastructure. And I think the good news is in Malaysia, while yes, we have a way to go, but I think the infrastructure from a recycling perspective, especially from plastics, UBCs, can formats, it's there. And also, I think, John, you were saying your area also do collection. So it is also part of the waste concessionaires to do collection of recycling materials and all that. So I think the infrastructure is there. Yes, there's still work to do with the hard to recycle materials, and we are working on those together with a partnership. But I think it's about linking and putting it all together in order to really create a positive impact. So yes, I think to sum up, large companies, we are starting, but I think the call is the more we get more members, the more we come together, we will be able to solve I call it the funding or the cost issue, and the infrastructure challenges that we have ahead. I hope I answered that question. Yeah. And if anyone else wants to jump in, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they did. I think it did answer it quite nicely as well. Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so I think Angela, unluckily she has to move on to another call now. Sorry, slightly over my 2 minutes, but yeah, again, thank you, Angela, for your time as being part of the panelist. If you have any questions specific to Angela, please let the organizers know, and we will try to get a response from her, and we'll respond to you as well. So again, thank you, Angela, for your time as being part of this panelist. Yes. Yeah, but ladies and gentlemen, please stay on. We still have a few more minutes left for this panel discussion. Please add in more questions as and when. We'll try to address them as much as we can. But yes, back to the same question as well on steps needed by smaller companies to take the shift towards a circular economy. Anyone else among our panelists wants to take up this very interesting response? Maybe Roberto?
Yes, thank you, Jason. The question is very interesting. We are here today to talk about EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. And this is one side of the story. The other side of the story is how a company can become more circular in the way they operate. And that requires a different type of discussion. So they need to embed circularity in their processes and their product design, in the way they handle waste, and so on and so forth. And I am a strong believer that large companies can do it, but also there is a way for small companies to do it and create efficiencies. So they shouldn't look into circularity as a way of wasting money, but as a way of saving money and to create competitive advantage, okay? So this is one side of the story. Let's go back to the EPR side of the story. So what we're working on with the government is to define the obliged industry participants. So as part of the EPR legal framework, we need to define who will have to pay into an EPR policy or into an EPR framework in Malaysia, and the modality, how much they need to pay based on their packaging footprint, how much packaging they put on the market. So the experience that we're getting right now with the large members that we have, thanks to them actually, will inform the policy, will inform these decisions, and we will have to make sure that smaller companies will pay in line with what they can afford. Yes, so nobody wants to disrupt the economy. This is going to be for the betterment of everything, not for, sinking the economy. And I'm sure that, EPR funding, when available to the waste management and recycling, systems in Malaysia, will greatly improve also the economic conditions because they will create more jobs. I was talking at a conference the other day, and I was sharing some numbers in terms of what EPR funding can be in terms of magnitude in a country like Malaysia, and it's very, very substantial. So I see this as a very positive drive also in terms of economic activities.
Cool, thank you, Roberto. Riichiro-san or John, would you like to potentially take up this question?
Yeah, basically, what I think is large companies to lead and to create reusable material market, so that smaller companies to follow, where they are able to purchase at the fair prices. So I think that's how the system should work.
Very, very good point. And John?
I think this basically crystallizes what I shared just now as well, right? The supply and demand side of the whole loop of a supply and demand. While we need to start somewhere to create the demand, and obviously with MAREA, as we have more and more members, then I think the sustainability of MAREA as a PRO. And eventually, we can actually, the more that we have together, then basically by generating more demand, then of course the supply will come in, right? So so that's the whole situation. I think this is a very, very, very meaningful work here that we are doing together with MAREA, which, we're looking forward to, environmentally green Malaysia.
If I can sum up this question nicely and our responses as well. At the end of the day, it's like we have to work together to basically get there. So in terms of infrastructure, we do have the capability, we do have the capacity, but we have to make sure that whatever is collected is sufficiently collected, is recovered. Solutions are out there, but we have to band together because no one can solve this problem by themselves. We all have to work together. It's not, sustainability isn't just something that the big companies should look into. Smaller companies can also play their part. We should be more inclusive. When EPR does come in, we will always find a solution to make sure that everyone can play a part and everyone has their role to play, whether it's us as individuals, small companies, large companies, we all have a role to play. But as Riichiro-san and John has rightfully mentioned as well, we have to also build that market because the demand for recycled content will eventually pick up. But right now we have to come up with those solutions to be readily available for people to eventually pick up when they are ready to pick up and when it becomes mandatory as well. So thank you for those responses. There's also another very interesting question here by another anonymous attendee. What does halal recycled plastic entail, and what is the certification process? That is a very interesting question. Who would like to take up this question? Maybe Riichiro-san.
Yes. What I understand about the process of producing a recyclable or reusable plastic is sorting of the collecting, sorting, crushing, and metal removal, material sorting, and melting and granulation. So those would be the plastic to be reused. But at the moment, throughout our communication with JACIM, they don't really have any clear guidelines or definition how the plastic which was used for a non-halal product can be reused for halal products. So maybe through the process of the plastic to be reusable plastic, there should be a clear guidelines and definition to be defined in near future. And I do understand it is under discussion, but maybe Roberto may have more information about this.
Thank you, Riichiro. I was talking a couple of weeks ago to a representative of the body that does this certification in Indonesia, halal certification in Indonesia, and basically, as you mentioned, the certification is about making sure that in all the processes related to collection, washing, recycling, and so on, the pig-derived substances in the material are removed and treated adequately. Yeah. So in Indonesia, this is already advanced to the point that some Malaysian companies have halal certification on recycled plastics in Indonesia, which is then recognized also in Malaysia. And basically, the certification looks at all the different processes and make sure that the contamination is removed and looks at different materials and all the rest. And I do agree with you that JACIM is currently looking into that, and it's work in progress, but I personally expect this to be solved quite rapidly because they do understand that this is a very pressing issue that needs to be, that requires answers as soon as possible.
Good to hear that. Thank you. Thank you,
Cool.
Roberto.
Thank you. Yeah. If I may chip in as well, actually, if I recall correctly, Jabatan Standards Malaysia, the Malaysia Standards Department, they did recently issue out a halal packaging guideline, which also includes some level of halal requirements for packaging. I think it's under MS 2565. I think they recently issued an update to that, if I recall, last year. From my understanding with Jabatan Standards Malaysia, it's still, as Roberto mentioned, it's still a work in progress. They still have to make sure that it is endorsed by JACIM. So JACIM is still in the process of making sure that the halal standards that is being proposed by Jabatan Standards does meet their requirements as well. But at the current juncture, as Roberto mentioned, they are halal standards abroad, but it is something that we have to incorporate within Malaysia as well. I also noticed that we are very soon up on time as well. We do have time for one more question, which I do see in the chat on my side here. So this is a question from the chat, which came to my chat. What do policymakers need to do to promote recycling within businesses and consumers? So this is our final question. So what do policymakers need to do to promote recycling within businesses and consumers? Who would like to take the first stab at this question? Okay, Roberto, I see you smiling.
Let me just start, Jason. I think that recently MITI launched a blueprint on circular economy and the EPR to a certain extent in the industrial commercial settings, and they are well on the way to do that. As far as consumer goods, MAREA is about post-consumer packaging, but we know that the circular economy for solid waste blueprint that was launched in August by KPKT talks about the implementation, the design implementation of EPR schemes also for other products, such as tires, batteries, clothing, and so on and so forth. So we will see that happening in the coming years. The priority right now, not because of MAREA, because it's a fact, is on post-consumer packaging. And what is very, very important to do right now is for us, or let's say for the policymakers to listen to us in terms of, the findings and the learnings that we can bring to them from our projects, and craft a nice, solid, well-designed policy framework as soon as possible, and hopefully make EPR mandatory for post-consumer packaging in the next 2 to 3 years. This is my wish. If you could ask me, what's in my wish list, this is my wish.
Okay, thank you, Roberto. I also noticed that we're almost just at time now. It's almost at 10:30. I think we've already come to the end of our panel discussion, as well as our MAREA showcase. So I would like to again thank all our participants for being part of our MAREA showcase, as well as for your questions. They're very, very good questions. So first, I'd like again to thank Roberto Benetello, our CEO, for giving his insights, as well as providing the keynote address earlier on, as well as our esteemed panelists, our chairperson, Ms. Ramjeet, Riichiro-san, and John, and as well as Angela, who unluckily had to leave just a moment earlier on as well. So we are at time. It is 10:30. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope this was a very informative session for all of you. Okay, over to you, CGM.
Bye.
Thank you, Jason, and all the speakers for your fantastic insights. Ladies and gentlemen, as we gear up for our next session, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please take a quick moment to share your feedback in our survey. Now, we are pleased to hear from our second keynote speaker, Aleyn Smith, who is a director at the Carbon Trust. Welcome, Aleyn.
Good morning, distinguished guests and partners. It's an honor to be here at this event. As COP29 unfolds, it emphasizes not only our shared climate commitments, but also celebrates the strides nations are making towards a sustainable, decarbonized economy. Today's session focus on the circular economy is central to this effort. Moving from a linear economy where resources are simply used and discarded to a circular model is essential. This transition requires us to reimagine our supply chains from production to end-of-life stage. My name is Aleyn Smith-Gillespie. I am a director at the Carbon Trust. The Carbon Trust is an organization that was set up over 20 years ago to accelerate the move to a decarbonized future. It is our central mission. And at Carbon Trust, we're already supporting clients in designing and implementing circular business models. Later on, I will share one such example in mobile devices and the ICT sector, where circular practices help extend product life and reduce waste, a model we can replicate across industries. In the context of climate change, the agenda requires radical decarbonization of our value chains. What needs to happen is effectively the decoupling of growth from our environmental impact. And circular economy is a key way in which this can happen. Globally, policies like the EU's Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, which took effect in July 2024, has set new standards for sustainability and circularity in products. Likewise, Malaysia's Plastic Sustainability Roadmap underscores the urgency of reducing single-use plastics and embracing circular solutions, demonstrating that circularity is now a necessary, not just an ambition. So what we are seeing now is not only the need from a climate change perspective, but also the growing imperative in terms of regulations and also in terms of what makes business sense for companies to act on. Before we go into more details on circular economy, it's important to remind ourselves of the key principles. And that is that the circular economy is restorative and regenerative by design. It needs to keep products, components, and materials at their highest utility and value at all times. And in fact, this emphasis on value is really central to both the sustainability impact of circularity, but also the business impact that it can provide companies. Before diving further, it's also useful to remind ourselves of what circularity is not. In terms of a linear economy model, what we see is that materials and products pass through a series of processes, a value chain, in which ultimately a lot of value is wasted. What we call a take, make, use, and ultimately lose. And what happens in this sort of model is that value creation is dependent on volume and not dependent on the value ultimately it provides to end consumers. There's no consideration of visibility of the total cost of ownership, and many times there is a single-use mentality when it comes to the design and the provision of products and services to the economy. Circular economy looks at designing into each stage of the process of the value chain, from production to use and end of life, a number of key principles. Firstly, it takes a total life cycle perspective in terms of cost, value, and impact the products and services can provide, and embeds into the design innovative customer level propositions and looks at how operations can be improved and changed, and ultimately looks at this from a whole business model perspective, not just, for example, around product design, but how a whole system can effectively be adapted in order to provide both a sustainable advantage as well as a business advantage and economic benefits to all players in the system. A circular economy, therefore, takes what otherwise would be a linear process and looks at, firstly, or in terms of different models, how products can be deployed in a more efficient and less wasteful way. So, for example, looking at how products can be redeployed across a number of different users in the economy, for example, through sharing, or also through the recondition of products or the remanufacturing of products so that they can cycle back into the value chain. Ultimately, when these models are not feasible, then at the very least to be recovering the resources and capturing that value rather than wasting it, so that valuable resources can go back through secondary material markets, for example, and closing that loop back into value chain. In some cases, this may go into other value chains as well. Another way of looking at circularity is by substituting non-renewable with renewable materials and inputs, what we would call circular sourcing. And where there are losses during the course of value chain steps, that these are recovered and that they are directed back into productive use. For example, with the principles of industrial symbiosis, where co-products can be recovered and go back into other value chains, for instance. Together, these various different models of circularity can really provide a powerful combination. Again, looking through each stage of production, use, and end of life, these types of business models can be adapted and can be integrated so that products and services are delivered in the most effective way and create that highest value possible. So, for example, combining circular sourcing with remanufacturing and reconditioning, looking at how products can be delivered as a service, for instance, and ultimately, when a product does come to its end of life, that there are effective models and systems so that the materials can be recovered and put back into productive use again. So we very much look at circularity in terms of business models and systems that function in an integrated way. And that is how circularity can really be brought to market in the most effective and powerful way possible. What I would like to do now is to provide an example of circularity in action. We work across a number of different sectors, and here I will look at one sector, which is the mobile and ICT sector, where circularity is extremely important, given the impacts that the sector has, both in terms of enabling change, enabling improvements in climate change adaptation, but also where the impacts of not having circularity can also have negative impacts in terms of sustainability. Starting off with understanding where carbon derives across the value chain in the ICT sector. We have been working with the GSMA and with many clients, which is the industry body around the mobile sector, to break down and understand and communicate where are the key carbon hotspots when it comes to scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 and 2, of course, is the operational emissions within a company's business boundaries, and scope 3 are the value chain emissions. The circularity, as we'll see, can have a very positive impact on reducing those scope 3 or wider value chain emissions. So as you can see here, the majority of emissions really lie in scope 3, outside of the company's boundaries. And this is quite typical across a number of different sectors. In particular, emissions arise in the supply chain, upstream, and also downstream in the use of products, given that they are many times energy consuming. What we have seen is applying circular principles such as designing for longevity, designing for repairability, looking at improving performance of products over their lifetime, and business model innovations that would enable those types of circularity models, which we looked at earlier on, can have a significant benefit in reducing emissions over the life cycle of products and at the overall organizational level of companies. These cannot on their own contribute to getting to net zero, but without them, the task is very, very difficult or possibly impossible. And they need to work in combination with all the other measures that companies can put in place, both in their own operations and in the supply chain. So for example, in addition to this, in addition to circularity, looking at sourcing renewable energy at each stage of production. We'll now drill down into a product level perspective. When we look at the different phases of a product life cycle, these break down into the upstream stages around the material extraction, production, transportation, when a product is used, so for example, a mobile device, and what happens to it at end of life. And on the right-hand side, we can see what an actual example of where these emissions lie. And as you can see, the majority of emissions lie in the case of a mobile device, in the upstream supply chain, so raw material production, raw material extraction, and production. And a relatively small amount, but still significant, lies in the use phase and end of life of products. So when we've been working with companies in this area, we've looked at how can circularity significantly reduce these emissions, these life cycle emissions, and how can this then flow back into how a company and an industry can design a system so that these emissions reduce over time. And we can indeed decouple growth from emissions and resource intensity. What we can see here is a comparison between a product, a single life cycle of a product on the left-hand side, and an illustration on the right-hand side of when this product is refurbished or remanufactured and can go back into productive use. And what we see is that the additional steps required for remanufacturing or refurbishment and reuse of this product do have a carbon emissions impact. However, when growth or when the use of products shifts from focusing on new products only to incorporating an increasing amount of refurbished products or remanufactured products, this can have a significant impact in reducing overall Scope 3 emissions. Firstly, looking at a new product, as illustrated here, the different aspects of the different stages of a product lifecycle on the left-hand side feed into an organization's Scope 3 emissions. The upstream lifecycle emissions in the supply chain feed into the upstream Scope 3 organizational emissions of, in this case, a mobile operator. And the downstream use phase emissions of a device feed into the downstream use phase emissions at an organizational level of a company. So ultimately, those upstream and downstream emissions of an organization are the sum total of all the volume of products that it purchases and that it sells and which its customers use. Now, moving to a model where an increasing volume of devices are refurbished devices, remanufactured devices rather than new devices, we can see that a large portion of emissions that come from a new product will be completely cut off. And so rather than each time coming with a new device, which feeds into a large portion of Scope 3 emissions, refurbished devices have a relatively small impact. They will still contribute to the upstream and downstream Scope 3 emissions of an organization, in this case, a mobile operator, but significantly lower than what they would have been if a new device had been purchased and then sold on to customers. The actual figures are illustrated here. And as we can see, depending on how carbon accounting functions in terms of circularity, and this is still an evolving space in the carbon accountancy field, a mobile operator, in this example, shifting from sourcing new devices to increasing the segment of refurbished or remanufactured devices that it sells, can reduce overall organizational emissions by at least 50%, if not significantly higher, 90%, in those devices that are those refurbished or remanufactured devices that are sold. So this can have a very significant impact. So overall, in this example, a company can really shift the dial when it comes to its overall company emissions by implementing circularity. Now, a key factor is here, how do you then operationalize this? How does a company go from the theory and the principles, the realization that this can potentially have an impact, to actually then implementing this in an organization? This is, of course, the most difficult part. And when we have been working with companies in this area, breaking down the aspects of circularity in terms of inflows, use phase, and outflows, and looking at what a company can do on each of these areas is a very important, powerful first step in a way of framing this. So firstly, looking at how a company can change and influence the inflows, i.e. the materials that come into its value chain, how it can impact the use phase of products, and how it can actually address the outflows to making sure that the loop is closed is key. And one example of the steps that a company can take across these three areas, inflows, use phase, and outflows, is shown on this slide. So firstly, on the left-hand side, looking at how a company can establish the foundation, then scale up, and then ultimately embed these practices within the business. So a practical example of what companies are already doing is, for example, working with suppliers and identifying opportunities in which suppliers can embed circularity within their own businesses, engaging the suppliers so that they understand what a company's goals are in terms of shifting towards circularity, looking at how suppliers can improve or change the way they source their own materials. Then, in terms of use phase, looking at developing and designing programs for device take-back, looking at how refurbishment models could work. And then, in terms of looking at the outflows, measuring and implementing processes for measuring the material flow within the company's own value chain, within its own processes, and looking at how it can work with partners at each stage, both in terms of suppliers, but also at the end of life, so that a company can track and measure and assess where devices and materials go at the end of life is also very important. So these key things on the left-hand side are important for establishing a solid foundation. And then companies need to look at how these scale up, and collaborations are key. No company can do this on their own. They need to be looking at both collaborating internally within the company, both across different departments, but also collaborating with suppliers, with third parties, with partners, but also looking at collaboration indeed with municipalities and with governments, local governments, in terms of helping to influence a shift in the overall system so that circularity becomes core to the economy as a whole, just within their own business. And on the right-hand side, we can look at how we see here how companies are embedding this circularity within the businesses, implementing programs and scaling these up and making these part of their business as usual. So this ranges from ensuring that procurement policies reflect circularity principles, requiring suppliers to implement these, looking at how product design within companies it incorporates core circularity principles so that, for example, products are designed to be repaired, designed to be refurbished. Looking at business model, going back to the business model innovation, going back to that model that we looked at the very beginning, where multiple different types of circularity can come together into an overall business models. So repairability, working with refurbishment, working with service, delivering products as a service, and then looking at recovery and bringing models back into productive use through take-back schemes. All of that working together is the most powerful model possible. So companies need to go through this journey, and you need to start somewhere. And all of this really needs to be part of an overall transition planning and execution process. Implementing transition planning is key to delivering net zero for companies, and circularity needs to be part of that. So when we look at a transition planning process, we work and we see companies taking a very rigorous approach to understanding the challenges and opportunities through analytical processes, using this to inform strategy and ambition, turning strategy into a concrete plan, and then executing on that plan, and iterating this and constantly improving and innovating. So circularity needs to be part of companies' transition plans and net zero transition plans. This can be different for different companies. Here's one example of the kind of steps that a company could take when it comes to moving towards net zero and then embedding circularity into these processes. At each of these steps, companies may require support, but they need to be working internally to get the resources required for this, get the funding, providing the right level of responsibility and governance to deliver this. So circularity is essential for delivering net zero. And it's also important that companies start with the basics, then progress towards ultimately embedding this within their business model. I hope this gives a good perspective of what circularity means and where this can go. And through the concrete example, in this case of mobile devices in the ICT sector, of how companies can identify and understand the opportunity and ultimately embed this and implement this in their business models. Thank you very much. And I hope this has been an inspiring session.
Thank you, Aleyn. Very important points indeed. We are pleased to hear from our final keynote speaker, Ms. Tan Mei Ling, Senior Country Operations Officer of World Bank Malaysia. Over to you, Mei Ling.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to speak this morning at the COP29 Parallel Program. I would like to speak today to you on lowering the resource curve, making development work for people and planet. Many times we see it's the people and planet that works for economic growth. Let's flip this to make it work for us and for our planet. This chart shows the material footprint growth with GDP and population growth. Between 2000 to 2017, 17 years, we see that the material footprint growth has outpaced GDP and population growth. Material footprint here refers to the extraction of raw resources from our earth. And as we can see, if we continue on this path, it's not sustainable. So the big question here is it possible to decouple the growth of material footprint from economy? And let us then build on this question and take it down to a bit more specific, practical, and actionable level. And I'd like to walk you through to an end-to-end value chain of how perhaps this conversation of inputs and resources gets all the way down to our daily use. So while we are in Baku, we are thinking globally, let's act locally. Let's start off with a simple example, plastics. Plastics are everywhere right now that you see in Malaysia. In fact, many of us may be impervious to the amount of litter that we see, whether it's in our neighborhoods, in communities, in our workplace, in public spaces. In this popular weekend picnic area, we see families that's having picnics, enjoying their weekends in spite of the mountain of rubbish that faces them. We go from one area that is highly urbanized to an uninhabited island, one of the islands in Langkawi. And despite being it's a small island, there's so much of rubbish. It's the picnic and people leave their plastic bottles and packaging and whatnot that they have left, and they leave it behind there, and you can see from the mountains of plastic bags that's there. How do we get here? We, in our daily meetings, in our daily lives, we go for meetings, we drink coffee and tea from the jugs, but we have plastic bottles, water from the plastic bottles. In our events and parties, while we eat the food and juices, and yet we have plastic water bottles. And also in our food court, the food that we eat in our daily lives is everywhere, and we don't even question it anymore. However, as we see, the throwaway culture, the litter, and where we don't throw properly, it lands somewhere on the beaches, on the riverines, and into our waterways. How does this plastic growth has become so exponential? In the last 15 years, between 2000 to 2015 alone, 44% of all plastic that has been ever manufactured is being done in this century. And this exponential phenomenal growth, this pink chart, when we look at it and break it down, it is everywhere in all spheres of lives, in every sector, from medical devices, healthcare, to industrial machinery, to household appliances and electronics such as phones, laptops, computers, to textiles, the clothes we wear, the packaging and consumer products. The trash from packaging alone accounts for nearly half of global plastic waste, and many of those are not properly recycled or incinerated. And this mismanaged plastic waste, where we see now, this map in 2021 shows a very sobering picture. Malaysia is one of the highest in the world at rate, and you can see that across in different countries in Africa as well as South America. But in Southeast Asia, Malaysia now has the highest share of one of the highest share in mismanaged plastic waste. And this plastic waste is from our own collective actions or inactions of not throwing plastic waste properly. And it's the riverines that contribute to the ocean plastic pollution. The top 10 world's 10 largest emitting in terms of plastic pollution. It is quite shocking to see Klang River as the top 2 in the world. All the top 10 are from Asia. But Klang, and being such a small country, we think our footprint in terms of pollution and emission is not great. But here it is, Klang River. And this plastic pollution is not just an environmental pollution, harming marine life, harming our life on land, and also human health, but it's also harming our climate agenda in terms of our emissions. So the end-to-end life cycle of plastic productions, from the raisins to the manufacturing of plastics to the use in the end products, such as in households, medical devices, etc., and to the collection of the waste itself, and the growth by 2030 is equivalent to 295 coal plants. So as much as we talk about energy, renewable energy, and retiring coal plants, if we don't address this phenomenal plastic explosion growth, we are actually doing a disservice. This is the dark horse. So as we move from coal and emissions, let us now think about energy. And we'll perhaps move to a more half glass full story. The UK now consumes less energy in absolute terms than back in 1970, 50 years ago. And this reduction of energy, one may say, is also because the shift from intensive energy manufacturing sectors to services-based sector. But it also comes with other tools and mechanisms such as market-based pricing, energy efficiency in its building materials, and investments in renewable energy, as well as a much higher consumer education and awareness that translates into business and household practices. And this energy reduction comes with, in spite of the UK economy has tripled in the same period, there's net positive GDP growth and net reduction in emissions, with UK being the leading here with other OECD countries that has also reduced greenhouse gas emissions during the same period. And let us now look into Malaysia. Malaysia's growth in energy consumptions has been increasing year on year. From 1990 to 2018. So as much as we look into matter, our national energy consumption, we might want to think whether we can flatten or even reduce the energy consumption. Here, the different types of fuel types, from petroleum products to electricity to gas, all these different fuel types in terms of petrol to lubricants and diesel and electricity, where does it goes to? In terms of final energy consumption by sectors, we can see it goes into the industry, transportation, residential, commercial, non-energy users, and agriculture. Transportation by far has the highest use in terms of energy consumption. So let us look into transport. For Malaysia, it has the highest vehicle ownership per capita in Southeast Asia. So the chart on the right shows that Malaysia, where you have cars and trucks and buses, the dark purple line, in terms of its vehicle ownership per capita, is nearer to the EU, right, and to the more developed countries. So as other countries in Southeast Asia is much lower, Malaysia has single-handedly increased the vehicle ownership per capita, and this numbers is in 2017. Now 2021, there are more vehicles than people in Malaysia, and this is really an area where we have to take a step back and says, is this truly sustainable to have more and more vehicles on the road? So what we say about EVs and being greener, but we actually have so many cars, vehicles on the road, and it's on an upward growth trajectory. And this is not sustainable in terms of traffic jams on the road, emissions, but also the use of materials. For example, plastics is the third most utilized components in a vehicle, and as there are more EVs, there will be more plastics, because it's being a lighter material, it will offset the higher weightage in batteries. With more cars on the road, it means more roads and more highways. And Malaysia now, as you can see, is a spaghetti of roads, especially in urban areas in the greater KL Klang Valley. It comes at the expense of cement, more cement and steel, which are hard to abate sectors. Though this is the knock-on effect on the value chain on other sectors. And what it means is not just on cars per se. Whether it makes more sense as we look into cars to have better public transportation and perhaps reduce the amount of cars, and within that share have more even EVs on the cleaner grid. The outsized negative implication of cement and the cement industry is this in Malaysia: the destruction of hills, the loss of biodiversity and resilience. Hills are natural sponges. It absorbs water in rains, and when we see now, when there are more and more rains, heavier rains, floods are increasing its intensity and its loss of lives and livelihoods. But this natural carbon sponge and also carbon areas, sponge areas, it has outsized impacts. If those hills are exposed, the soil are exposed, you're going to get more floods downstream. So let us look at how can we reduce our material footprint for growth, good economic growth to be truly sustainable. So it's beyond financing question. It's not just about having more money. Perhaps it really is to have a hard look at reducing our material footprint. And how can we do that? For plastics, perhaps we can lower the exponential growth of plastics. It means also the single-use plastics, the packaging, as well as the durable plastics. The single-use plastic that we see, can we reduce the amount of plastic water bottles, saucers, and cups? In durable plastics, we see EU now is thinking of, in future by 2030 or 2035, having mandatory repairs on appliances and household appliances. So it's not a throwaway culture. If the TV is spoiled, can we fix it? Can we take it out and fix it rather than to throw the entire TV away? Let's implement the Plastics Sustainability Roadmap and Extended Producers Responsibility. EPR is so important for the reduction of single-use plastics. Let's empower local councils and increase our education and engagement to improve recycling rate for all types of plastics. In terms of energy, let's look into enhancing energy reduction, energy efficiency, as well as renewable energy. Let's really put first and foremost energy efficiency and conservation as the first thing on the agenda, lowering the curve. The chart on the left shows that in terms of actual energy consumption, that is a third of it, 35%, is actually energy loss. The rest of it then goes to more productive use, either into non-electricity, as you saw in transportation and manufacturing, and electricity. But that loss, actually, when we go back to the supply chain, it requires the amount of energy supply. If we can then reduce the loss along the grid, why not? And that it also means through energy efficiency reduction and as well being able perhaps to have encouraging solar on rooftops, because the production of electricity is in situ, there's less loss along the transmission of the grid. And in Malaysia being such a highly urbanized 80% with lots of high-rise buildings and skyscrapers, it may make sense to have solar on rooftops, and promoting more trees and preserving green spaces will reduce urban heat island. As we know, the use of electricity, a lot of it comes from air condition. So if where areas where we can reduce energy reduction, that it also translates to a better bottom line for us. So here is a call for action to all policymakers and also to households and to businesses. We are all here as daughters and sons, as husbands and wives, and acting in concert for all people. This is a call for action that when we think on the need for the survival of our planet, for the future of our people, we will think then the question is, let's work together better. What can we do to really reduce our material footprint? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mei Ling, for your remarks. And thank you all for joining today's session on the last mile to sustainably serve local and global consumer demands. As we conclude today's sessions, we invite nations to join Malaysia in advancing sustainable trade practices through collaborative partnerships that strengthen climate governance, foster carbon trading, and promote circular innovations, paving the way for a resilient future. Before you go, please take a moment to scan the QR code for our feedback survey. Your input is greatly appreciated. As always, all our sessions are recorded and will be available on our official CGM YouTube channel for anyone wishing to revisit these insights. The recordings will be time tagged with accompanying blog post to follow. And don't forget to watch the live stream for the Malaysia Pavilion at COP29 in Baku by visiting the official Malaysia Pavilion Facebook page or by scanning the QR code on the screen. On behalf of our team, thank you to our speakers and participants for engaging in this crucial conversation. And let's continue tomorrow for Day 5, Climate Tech, Tackling Climate Change on Home Ground. Take care and see you tomorrow.